Horizon spends a lot of its story focused on what happened in the past, rather than what's happening in the present. Even though there are no direct flashbacks to the 21st century, the plot spends so much time discussing, exploring, and alluding to the past that it projects such an apprehensible image of what the final, dire, soot-clouded days of modern humanity looked like. A key lesson for writers is to show not tell, but Horizon never shows us the past, and yet the legacy it lays out is so meticulous and thorough that if the player takes the time to explore, almost no quandary goes ignored. It's so easy to picture the apocalypse Horizon presents to us in my head, if for no other reason than fiction has given so many apocalypses to us. I personally imagine the Pharaoh Swarm as a more Gears of War brownish version of the Terminator apocalypse. But the way the game conveys the sheer hopelessness of the swarm, how the leaders of humanity have given up stopping it, and are willing to sacrifice everything and everyone on Earth just to buy a few more seconds for the Zero Dawn team, it's just heartbreaking. Although it's worth noting that it's a little bit over-dramatic. I know that the extinction of humanity is about as dramatic as you can get. Still, one of the main threats of the swarm is that they will destroy the biosphere, and therefore result in the destruction of the Earth's atmosphere, as there would be no trees to produce oxygen. Which is why the game tries to say that hiding underground isn't an option for humanity. But the simple truth of it is that there's too much oxygen on Earth for humans to run out of it. In fact, if every plant and animal were to die, humanity would starve long before suffocation. But enough backstory, let's get into the narrative of Horizon Zero Dawn. Zero Dawn is very much a character-driven story, more so a protagonist-driven story. Although we don't ever leave Aloy's side until the post-credits scene, she's also the only character that most people will remember from the game. It's not so much that the rest of the cast is terrible or bland, still, due to Aloy's insistence on solidarity, she rejects the supporting cast. So on top of the fact that most characters disappear from the plot after their arc is done, it's fair to say that most of the cast is presented as forgettable. But while that's a perfect segue into Aloy, if I drift off from the plot I won't get back to it. I think it's fair to say I was expecting big things from Zero Dawn's plot, as it's written by the lead writer behind what I consider to be one of the best written video games of all time, Fallout New Vegas. Zero Dawn's story is good in its own right, but it's leaps and bounds behind its predecessor. I suppose there's also a more of a cinematic tone shift, so there's no real room for the wit of Fallout. I suppose the story just didn't stand out. Now, if this were a world review, I'd be applauding the narrative team for all the factions and lore of Zero Dawn, but this video is focused on the narrative. But I'm not just limited to talking about the campaign, I can talk about the side content as well. Zero Dawn's side quests are exemplary, though I suppose that most open world games fail horrifically when it comes to engaging side content. Zero Dawn, or PlayStation in general, always manages to meet my expectation for side quests. I want short, bite-sized stories that give me different things to do from the main plot, and that motivate me to complete them through rewards. Zero Dawn does all that, but there's never that one side quest that I thought was really good. Instead, they mainly serve to flesh out the world more, which is a reward in and of itself, really. Speaking of fleshing out the world, Zero Dawn has a rather needless expense. For example, during every conversation, there's a dialogue wheel, which is a good thing for an RPG to have, but it's almost entirely useless. None of the side options further the plot, so their purpose is entirely based on lore. I mean, these lines have multiple back and forth voiced dialogue lines for every single one of these tangents, so I have to wonder if it's misplaced. I mean, if you really care about the minutiae of the world, wouldn't you rather these be text logs so you could reference them later in the menu? And typically I wouldn't even mention this, except I think the game makes a trade-off in giving us all these extra dialogue lines. Automated animation. These faces just don't look right. Compared to how spectacular all the models are, the second their faces begin to contort in these inhuman ways, it just takes me right out of the game. So I'm wondering if trading hand-animated dialogue was worth it for mostly superfluous conversation trees. Again, if there were multiple ways individual questlines could play out, this would be totally understandable, but instead it's an odd inclusion that hurts the game more than it helps it. But let's get on to the main event of Horizon Zero Dawn's story, Aloy. Aloy is a unique case of someone with astounding proficiency and talent, but also someone deeply flawed and troubled. I picture her as someone who could dauntlessly stare down a T-Rex, but be on the verge of tears in an awkward social situation. She and I share a trait I found very relatable, thinking out loud, most likely due to her ostracism and socially desolate upbringing. It speaks to a little bit of her mental instability, how she often rejects help and insists on being alone on her quest. The game may try to phrase this as Aloy believing the journey too dangerous for anyone but her to take on alone, but I think, like me, she's autistic, because she often mirrors my behaviours, like in those moments of silence when you feel you should be saying something, but you don't really have anything important to say, but if you make random small talk, it's obvious that you have nothing to say and they'll think you're just being a dick, and anyway, I think the reason she's alone is that she's terrified of connection and speaking to other people. Another reason I think Aloy is on the spectrum is the way she hyperfixates on playing with her focus, the way I do with video games, the desire to completely understand something new and fantastical. Aloy is a character that revels in solitude, and seems to always have a single focused mind, always wanting to continue the plot forward, which makes her an odd choice for an open world protagonist. It never feels in character for her to do side quests. Hunting feels like a natural extension of her personality, but this isn't someone I'd picture as being particularly interested in helping random citizens. That's not to say she's uncaring. On the contrary, she does want to protect people, as her entire motivation is saving the world. Still, the way she pushes herself constantly towards the next goal, I have to wonder if part of what drives her is the fear of slowing down when the one person who unconditionally loved her is gone. Not knowing how to be normal is why she feels the need to be a superhero, taking down machines and cultists. It's not something I've ever seen discussed, but still, I think I'm in a unique perspective to recognize Aloy's social patterns, the awkward way she conveys herself to the people who like her, the desire to be alone, and the small shakes that Ashly Burch gives in the vocal performance. A lot of what she's saying are the types of things I'd say to get out of social gatherings. It's not a fear of being rejected, it's a fear of people in general, so that's why she has to come across as a brave hunter, because if she's not, the fear is something she's forced to confront. And that's why to me, Aloy is a broken person, and she's one of the few video game characters I can genuinely relate to, and I feel like I have a special connection with her that no one else can see. Horizon Zero Dawn's narrative may not be as masterful as the likes of its first-party contemporaries, however its mythology is almost unmatched, and it presents one of the most believable characters I've ever played as. Aloy feels like a character I have a special connection with, and I'm able to connect with in a way I can't with most other video game characters, as she and I both have autism, making her one of the few video game characters I can actually look up to.